We have 4 items on our agenda today, and we will begin with item number 1, which is fiscal year 2008 supplemental appropriations for police and fire departments. Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bob Pearson, Finance Director, and I'm going to turn this item over to Rudy Livingston, the Accounting Manager, to talk about this supplemental appropriation for fiscal year 2008, which, of course, as we know, ended on June 30th.
So. Okay, Rudy.
Good afternoon. As indicated in the agenda report here, this is a three-part item that we're discussing here. Basically, what we as you know, for the public's benefit, we have the annually adopted budgets, and that the government is required, the departments are required to maintain that budget and come in within that budget. There are a few anomalies that occurred this year, so we're coming back to the Finance Committee and subsequently Council to request some additional appropriations so that we have that legal authority granted to us by City Council. And those are what we'll discuss today. During the fiscal year 2008, the Fire Department responded to several calls for mutual aid assistance during the year to fight fires in several jurisdictions throughout the state here. Some of these overtime costs are anticipated and they're budgeted, but the high number of calls for mutual aid assistance far exceeded what we had budgeted. And it resulted in a higher level of overtime costs for what we were doing here. Correspondingly, the department received also a higher amount of mutual aid revenue that they had anticipated. They budgeted for a portion of that, but we get reimbursed for that mutual aid by the mutual aid revenue there, and that was correspondingly higher. And what we're asking council to do is approve an increase in appropriations to cover those overtime costs and to fund that by increasing revenue in the fire department there, so that we'll offset those things that will have no effect on the reserves and the general fund. That's part number 1. And the amount of that is $210,000, what we're requesting at this time. The second part of this relates to the police department. And the police department overhired for several positions during the fiscal year to ensure that they had staffing levels that were at an adequate level in light of anticipated retirements and also new recruits making their way through the academy, making sure that we had the constant staffing that we needed. And council was well aware of this. In fact, council approved this and directed that to be done so. Also, when we came to you at the third quarter for the third quarter review, we mentioned that the costs in the police department were running at or slightly above the year-to-date budget amount, and we anticipate that we might need to come back to council and request some additional funds. And we in fact do need to do that. The reason for this overage in there's basically 3 parts in there. Is that we know that with the higher fuel costs that we've had this year, that fuel costs were about $50,000 over what we had budgeted for them. And that was an unforeseen thing that nobody could have really planned for. The other thing is that we've had higher than normal vacation cash outs and also payment to retirees for their accrued leave time. And so staff is recommending that council increase the appropriations in the police department by $250,000 to cover this. Now, we also wanted to have no impact on the reserves in the general fund, and so what we've done is we looked for other departments within the general fund where there were some savings in there, and actually in the finance department we had a few salary vacancies that provided adequate funds for that. So what we're requesting that council do is increase the appropriations in the police department by $250,000 and approve a corresponding reduction in the budget appropriations for the finance department of $250,000 so that we can cover this overage here.
Now, Rudy, the relationship to the finance department is purely that's just where the savings happen to be, right? I mean, it could be any other
exactly
department. It's not particularly related to finance. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, that's correct. We could have taken it out of several different departments, but for simplicity purposes, we decided to take it out of this one department.
Okay, so those are your recommendations?
Yes, sir.
Committee? Ms. Falcone?
I have a question. I think it's probably to the Chief of Fire, Mr. Ron Prince. Chief, it's good to see you.
Good afternoon.
We don't get to see a lot of you.
Good to see you.
I'm just a little confused. Maybe you could help me out. It was my understanding at a previous report to the full council that there was a great deal of mutual aid that went out this year, last year as well. We were seeing these very large conflagrations that are happening, and it takes many more people to fight them, and so we have been sending more folks. But I heard a figure bandied about, maybe officially, maybe unofficially, that we actually made close to $1 million in reimbursements over the mutual aid. So I guess I'm just a little confused. If you could give me a brief walkthrough of how that exactly happens and why we need to backfill to the tune of $250,000.
Well, yeah, Councilmember Falcone, I can't, because I don't have them right in front of me, I can't tell you the exact numbers, but what I can tell you is that we get reimbursed for all of our actual expenses. And I think the number that was talked about earlier in the year, we actually had in February, had an additional appropriation given to us, about $215,000 to try to make us whole mid-year based on these additional expenses.
That's prior to getting reimbursed. We were
right.
floating it, if you will.
Reimbursements were trickling in throughout the course of the year. That represented about half of the unanticipated revenue above and beyond expenses. So I think the net revenue above what was anticipated and above what our actual expenses were was closer to $460,000.
Okay.
So we got half of that, and the council appropriated that additional amount in February. So now we have an outstanding, we have availability, I believe, about 220,000 perhaps, of, again, revenue above and beyond actual expenses. So that's where this $210,000 comes from. So the $1 million actually isn't accurate in terms of revenue above expenses.
Okay.
But
all right.
that's a real broad brush stroke. Rudy's got more details.
It is, and I guess, people hear that when we send folks away, not only do we retain enough folks here to keep us all safe, but it's also great experience for folks to go away and learn, especially about the wildfire, forest fire actions, because they're quite different from urban fires, but also that there is actually money to be made by the department to some extent. So I was hoping you could, settle that out a little bit. Maybe Rudy, you can.
Yeah, Rudy?
Yeah, I wanted to make one point of clarification here that probably I think a lot of people don't quite understand. And it's good for the public to understand what happens with the mechanics of it. Well, while we do get reimbursed for the excess costs that we incurred because of these events where we're called up for these mutual aid assistance, that money doesn't necessarily become spendable. And so we have the actual expenditures there which have to track within our legal authorized budget. And so to the extent that they're within that budget, we're okay. And the reason we're coming here today is because we have actually gone beyond that. But we receive revenues back in, and those don't become spendable revenues until council actually authorizes us to use those. So while we may have gotten additional revenues in excess of the costs, until council actually approves that the revenues to be brought in and to be used for expenditures, and we can't quite do it automatically. So
two things, and then I'll leave this subject because it has to do also with police. But over and over, we're going to be having more folks go out on mutual aid, and I hope we continue to do that because it's great for everyone all the way around. I wouldn't want the public to get the impression that by us sending our very capable men and women from our fire department out to these scenes of great disaster, that it's costing our taxpayers money. In fact, it's not. And I'm trying to get to that, I think, is my point.
Yeah, that is correct. We're made whole on those off-district responses, and we also get paid for when we backfill and create. All of our stations have staffing full-time, even though we're out on these assignments. We get reimbursed for all the overtime costs to backfill, and so we never have a station abandoned in those cases. So, but that is correct, Council Member.
Offline, I'd like to actually go through it line by line with you, just so that I can fully appreciate the nuances, but I want people out there to understand that this isn't costing us money. It's a good thing, and we're being made whole.
That's correct.
Okay, are there any further questions from the committee? Councilmember
Nope.
Stein?
I can move this to the council.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mr. Chair, that'll go to the full council next week.
Now, Mr. Pearson and I had a short discussion before the meeting today and suggested that we move item 4 up because we have some guests here today. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I would, staff would recommend that
Item
we.
4 is the funding allocation for the organizational development category of city's community promotion grants with the Santa Barbara County Arts Commission. And I think Jenny Brush is here to make a short presentation.
I'm expecting 3 or 4 more City Arts Advisory people, so.
I mean, if the committee would, yeah, absolutely. We could do that. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, thank you.
We were trying to accommodate members of the public rather than have them sit through.
They might have thought the meeting started at 12:30.
It's very possible.
Okay. That's good. Item 2 then.
Is Simon here? Yeah, we're ready. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. With your indulgence, we'd go to item 3.
Okay, fine.
Thank you so much. Sorry.
Mr. Kiefer.
We're going to do them all at the end, so it doesn't really matter what order we take them in. So.
Does that work now?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee. I have a request here from Transition House for a pre-development loan of $120,000 in RDA funds. This will be for the construction of new affordable housing on the mom's property, 421 East Coda Street, and this will be housing for formerly homeless families. Now, if this sounds familiar, it is. The Finance Committee approved a pre-development loan of $100,000 of home funds last April. And Transition House is not looking for another loan. They're looking to make just 2 adjustments to the loan that was already approved. And they're looking to increase the loan amount from $100,000 to $120,000, and they're looking to use RDA funds instead of home funds. Now, despite this increase in the pre-development loan, there wouldn't be any increase in the total subsidy that they're looking for. As we reported last April, we fully expected them to come back and ask for $700,000 in home funds for construction. So with the $100,000, that would be a total subsidy of $800,000. What they're asking for now is that they get $120,000 in RDA funds. They come back and ask for $680,000 in home funds. The total subsidy still is at $800,000 that we expect right now. So you may ask, why bother with all this?
Guess I'd ask, why is it different now than it was a few months ago?
Well, I can get to that, but first let me answer the question as to why bother to begin with in the first place. And that is to maximize the use of Section 8 vouchers. And this is very important. If you recall, Section 8 is where we've got, say, a market rate unit of $100 or $1,000 per month. We've got tenants that can only afford $600 per month, and then the federal government kicks in a subsidy of $400 per month, so the landlord is made whole. So this is an important source of funds for us for operating expenses. What we want to do is a little complicated here. We want to blend funding sources. And when you blend funding sources, that enables you to designate some units as home units and some units as RDA units. And the reason we want to do that is that you can't use Section 8 in home designated units because they consider it to be double dipping, that you're getting a subsidy for the construction and now a subsidy for the operation. Well, we look at this very differently, and RDA doesn't have that similar kind of a restriction. So we want to minimize the number of home units that we're going to have, maximize the number of RDA units, and the limiting factor there is that we've got a cap. We can't put any more than $170,000 of home funds per unit into the project. So if we do 4 home funded units at $170,000 cap, that gives us $680,000, and we'll do that in home funds. The $120,000 would stay as RDA funds. This enables us to make 4 units then
RDA units, they can get Section 8. And, depending on what the rent levels would be, this could possibly add up to $30,000 per year in operating income for Transition House.
Mr. Schneider?
This is why we pay you to do this instead. So, I think for all the reasons, you've looked at this carefully, and I know you've talked with Transition House, the Housing Authority is looking at this. So I just move this to council. I think this is a no-brainer.
Is there a second? Okay, moved and seconded. No further questions, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Simon. Okay, Mr. Pearson, now what would you like to do?
Thank you for your indulgence. We're going to recommend that we move to item 2, which is the Statement of Auditing Standards number 114. A very fun and
okay, I see Rudy is back now.
I've been waiting all weekend for this, quite frankly.
yes.
This is the item
This
that gets
is-
me so excited.
Exactly. And I'm going to ask, have Mr. Livingston make this presentation as well.
Chairman Horton and members of the Finance Committee, sorry. I was just thinking that little nursery line, Jack, be nimble, Jack, be quick. I kind of, jumping around on the schedules here. This is good. Well, I'm here today actually to discuss with you a new auditing or requirement imposed upon the auditors that affects the city. We have the Government Accounting Standards Board, who directs the standards essentially for governmental accounting, has issued a statement on auditing standards number 114, which is entitled Auditor Communication with Those Charged with Governance. The provisions of this SAS, we'll refer to as a SAS 114, are applicable to the City of Santa Barbara for beginning with the audit of financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2008, so for this past year. Now, I want to reiterate one thing. This is an obligation that is imposed upon the auditors and not upon the city, although it does reflect on it. There are implications here. So as we go through this, we'll keep that in mind. SAS 114 was implemented in the wake of some well-publicized audit failures and emerging best practices in the accounting industry here. Expectations have increased for the auditors, and especially with relation to their communications with the governing boards, whether it be audit committees or finance committee or city council, whatever that may be. And so they've imposed some requirements that the auditors communicate certain things with those that are charged with governance. They use these funny terms, and those charged with governance simply means somebody that's responsible for the city government. And management is referred to those who have the responsibility for making decisions on the financial statements. And so once we get through all this all the funny little dictionary items here, I think you get to the gist of it. Basically, what this says is that we have to have effective two-way communications. The auditors need a point person for the city who can make decisions and can be told and discussed, discussions can be made regarding certain things. One of the things that is important is that before an audit starts, the auditors are required to have a planning conference, and they make certain decisions based on how they're going to run the audit. And one of the things that they are required to discuss with the management here is the specific points in that audit conference, the planned scope, the timing, what's happening there in the audit, what's anticipated. There are certain representations that are made in the course of the audit, and the auditors have to request that this come from the management, and typically we do a management representation letter, but they also want, and that's usually handled by the finance director and myself, but now they want to have the representative from the city involved with that. The third thing that needs to be discussed, which is probably the most important of all of these, are any unresolved disagreements between the auditors and management. We haven't had issues with this, and as far back as I know, there have been no issues of disagreements with the auditors, but it's something that's required. So what staff is recommending is that council designate the chairman of the finance committee, or in future years, if it happens not to be the chairman, the chair, whoever that person may be, to serve as a liaison with the city's independent auditors for the purposes of these communications that are addressed in SAS 114. And this would include meeting with the auditors during the annual audit, as well as other times when additional communication is required. And that concludes the comments, basically.
Okay.
Any questions?
Ms.
that I have
Ms.
to
Pearson?
answer.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add that before bringing this recommendation to you, we did check with the chair of the Finance Committee to see if the chair would be willing to serve in that capacity. And for us, it was, and the chair has indicated a willingness. So part of the thing for staff is that it's a balance between meeting the requirements of SAS 114 and a procedural simplicity. So in other words, trying to schedule a meeting when we already have to schedule 5 auditors and 3 city staff, most of which are management, Rudy or Bob Samario or myself, and then to have the chair of the Finance Committee serve in that role we thought was appropriate. The auditors have said that as far as they're concerned, meets their obligation under SAS 114, and the chair has indicated a willingness to do that. And then the chair would be reporting to the Finance Committee and the full council any issues that arose that were deemed to be worthy of arising to that level.
So could I, since I'm the designated hitter here, could I just ask a question? Is it that they want an elected person rather than a staff person in this role? Is that
That's
it doesn't
absolutely
quite
right.
say that in here as I read it.
Well, we try to say that, and that's exactly right. I mean, we're Rudy and myself and Bob and Mr. Armstrong are management, and the fact of the matter is that the city's independent auditors, technically just like the city administrator and the city attorney, work for and technically report to the city council. Because they are your eyes and ears on the ground every year to make sure management, particularly in this case the financial management, is doing their job and doing it according to standard and generally accepted accounting principles. I mean, that's really the auditor's job, is to issue an opinion that our financial statements are presented fairly in all material aspects and fairly present the financial condition of the city. And so, in a sense, and I always kid that finance department's the only department in the city that gets an annual external audit. And I mean, it's true. And basically their job is to issue an opinion on our financial statements so that you and the people who use those financial statements can be assured that they have been prepared according to generally accepted accounting principles and that they fairly present in all material aspects the financial condition of the city as of that date, June 30 of whatever year. And in this case, what the SAS 114 does is it essentially says that the auditors need to have a direct or a more direct line of communication with the governing body so that they have a way to communicate to you if something should arise between the auditors and management. And Mr. Livingston's right. I've been here 20 years, and it's really never been necessary. And this auditing standard really arose out of the private sector primarily. But there are instances, City of San Diego, with their well-documented financial statement snafus and the like in the public sector as well. And that's, I think, what led to SAS 114. And we feel, and the auditors are comfortable with having a chairperson of the Finance Committee be that representative.
Okay. And
Okay, Ms. Falcone.
Mr. Chair, I would like to nominate you as our designated watchdog over this SASY 114 that is part of the reason I stopped at year 2 in tax law, you see.
Second, happily.
Well, let me see here. Even if I vote no, it's still going to pass.
You're stuck, kiddo. There you go.
So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Thank you, Rudy.
And we'll be moving this to for full council approval next week on consent.
And Mr. Chair, before we move on to, I think, is your last item of item 4, can I get someone out there to turn the air down a little? You could hang meat in here, you know, and it's not like me to want the air turned down. Ask anybody. But I think we've hit a limit here. It's a little much. So thank you.
All right. Well, let's proceed with item 4 then. And Jenny has been up here before, so we'll bring her back.
Now, Jenny, now.
Me too.
No, it's,
Why don't you tell the TV audience who you are?
I'm Jenny Brush, Executive Director of the County Arts Commission, and I serve as staff to City Arts Advisory. Chair Horton and council members Falcone and Schneider, thank you for an opportunity to report on what has transpired regarding the this year's funding for organizational development. On July 29th of 2008, the Finance Committee reviewed the City Arts Advisory and Events and Festivals grants recommendations in the 3 categories, that is, events and festivals, community arts, and organizational development. At that meeting, the Finance Committee recommended to go ahead and forward the community arts and the events and festivals recommendations for council approval, but at that meeting they asked that the City Arts Advisory allow Summer Solstice Nonprofit Organization to submit a letter of clarification regarding their grant request and to have Arts Advisory re-review the organizational development grant requests. The Organizational Grant Review Committee did meet on August 11th and reviewed all of the applications submitted for the Organizational Development Grant funds, including the Summer Solstice Letter of Clarification. Responding to the request from the Finance Committee, their recommendation was to fund Summer Solstice $7,500 by reallocating and reducing funding recommendations from 11 of the other organizations in that grant category. At the August 21st Arts Advisory meeting, the Organizational Development Grant Review Committee recommendations were presented to the full City Arts Advisory Committee. After considerable discussion with public input, including input from the Summer Solstice Celebration Executive Director, the City Arts Advisory denied the Organizational Development Subcommittee's recommendation. While a motion was made to accept the recommendation by one of the Arts Advisory Committee members, there was no second of that motion. Instead, there was unanimous vote to forward the original recommendation of the Organizational Development Subcommittee back to the Finance Committee. The discussion which led to the decision to deny Organizational Development Subcommittee recommendations included the following. There was a discussion of the integrity of the process, the thoughtfulness and considerable work effort completed by the subcommittees in reviewing the grants in the first place, understanding the directive from the Finance Committee, and understanding how the appeals work and who can appeal decisions. Financial participation of the Community Arts Workshop was another issue, and the process being valued, among other things, was a concern of the committee. You have received a spreadsheet that shows the original recommendations of the Organizational Development Subcommittee, which the City Arts Advisory approved. It also includes the revised recommendation of the subcommittee that went back to review the process after receiving the Solstice Letter of Clarification. I need to say that because I was out of the country during the Ad Hoc Review Committee and the Arts Advisory meeting, which I had notified you that I would be out of town for these meetings, upon returning to town, I have followed up with each member individually in lengthy conversations about the process and their decision-making in this, and find that they were all unanimous in their position regarding this issue. I want to recognize the dedication, careful consideration, and thoughtfulness that Arts Advisory Committee members bring to the review process of the nearly 80 grants they review each year. All are appointed, as you know, by council and serve in a volunteer capacity. They do not take their recommendations to council lightly. We feel strongly about the significant impact on Solstice. We feel strongly about the significant impact that Solstice has on our community and its work with artist-led workshops, community arts workshops, and the workshops for underserved youth. It is my sincere hope and that of the City Arts Advisory Committee that we move forward in refining the process and return to the Finance review and refining the process for the 2009-2010 grant cycle and return to the grants, the Finance Committee before the end of the year with some specific recommendations to address the issues that were raised this year during this process. I have a number of City Arts Advisory members who were at that meeting and can speak specifically to the issue.
Okay, well, committee, it's my intention to take public comment at this time. If that's acceptable to everyone, then those of you that would like to speak, please come up here, state your name and your position, and then try to keep it to 2 minutes if you can. So we'll open it for public discussions this time. Anybody want to speak?
Okay. And I should say that Phyllis DiPiccetto, our chair, is out of the state at the moment.
She's in Montana.
Yes.
Please proceed.
Hi. I'm Julie McLeod. I'm Executive Director of Santa Barbara Dance Alliance, on the board for Performing Arts League, and a longtime rabble-rouser when it comes to the arts. And I was on the Arts Advisory Committee somewhere between 20 and 30 years ago, and we ran into a very similar situation. And I think I have sent an email to council members, so that committee members, so that you know what the issue is. And it's basically that an advisory committee needs to have their parameters set, and as an advisory committee, honored for the work that they're doing, and that they need to hone to those parameters that are set so that there's a good working relationship between the advisory committee and city council. And when we last had a problem, one of our illustrious and very dramatic women in the community said, "Oh, we must have some more money. We can't live without this." And city council said, "Okay, take money away from everybody else and give her more money." Well, all of the organizations are doing wonderful things for the community, and we are saturated with so many nonprofit organizations in this community compared to the percentages of other communities. And money is tight. We're all suffering. We're all scraping the bottom of the barrel and having our hand out, "Please, sir, I want some more." And so we can't really compare that one group is doing more for the community than another. And we just need to set our parameters and go by them. And I think perhaps, as we did so many years ago, we set a work session with City Council and clarified a lot of these issues. And it moved very smoothly after that. So I encourage you to look at the ethics of having a committee who are skilled in what they're doing, and knowledgeable in the arts community, to make their decisions and help them to abide by what your regulations are.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak today? Room full of people. Okay. No, someone else?
I'm Judy Nilsson, and I'm a member of the Arts Advisory Committee, and I think Jenny covered it completely and indicated that it was the matter of integrity that the committee was really involved with, or felt very strongly about. And my take on it is that we are an advisory committee, and these people very seriously considered what they were doing. They made a suggestion, they presented it to you, and if you don't like it, then it's your option to change it. But we were sticking by our original decision, and that was really what it boiled down to. Okay?
Thank you. If no one else wants to speak, then it's over to the committee. Ms. Falcone.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for your work. I don't think anybody, under any circumstances, wants to give any of the committees, of which we have, 40, the idea that we don't value your work very deeply. We can't possibly do our work at the City Council without all of the support and the underpinnings that the citizens of this community give to all of the various areas of their own particular interest, be it the environment, be it creeks, be it homelessness, be it arts, be it, you can run down the list of I mean, even trash, solid waste, we have committee members that help us there. So it's not ever about wondering whether or not the committee members took their job seriously or rushed through it, or that one organization is better than another or doing more for the community. It's just never about that, because everyone gives to the community in their own special, particular way. And that's part of why we're so rich here in assets, in terms of human assets, really, is because everybody does fill a very special niche. That being said, something happened here this year that needs to be looked at and analyzed unemotionally, but very thoroughly. Now, I spoke to Patrick Davis, who's been around for, many, many years, just for some history and background. I called Phyllis in Montana, where they have a second home, had a long conversation with her, because Solstice in particular, I mean, this is sort of, we're not picking on Solstice. This isn't really about Solstice. This is about any other group, really, that this could have happened to. But they've been receiving not only the line item, but the grants for decades. And so, why now? What's different this year? I don't think that there's an issue of double dipping. I see lots of other organizations that have line items that also get grants from various different places. And so that to me is a red herring, and I'm not going to, engage in that conversation. But what I understood was fundamental to one of the tenets that your organization relies on, and that is the grant application being complete and being thorough. And it's my understanding that in this case, the application was not deemed to be complete. Now, that's a fundamental threshold. If you're not complete, you can't compete. I mean, to use an old phrase. If that's the case, then the Solstice application goes no further, and the rest of them move forward. Now, that's my understanding of what happened here this year. And so if that application was not complete, and I'm certainly not going to judge as to whether it is or not, that's your standards, that's what you do. You deem whether or not something is complete and fully ready to go. In this circumstance, I understand it was not. Now, some may argue that's not the case. However, that is what the full committee decided was the case. So under those circumstances, the application doesn't move any further. So then the rest of the money gets divvied up between all the rest of the applicants. That was not clear here, at least to me, last time. There were all sorts of other things flowing in the air, which I don't really think address the fundamental issue. Now, I appreciate the committee taking the second look. I very, very much do. Because as advisory, we think you do an absolutely fabulous job, and we don't very often meddle, or we don't always often, see that there's something that we have questions about. But every once in a while, there are things that come up at all the various different committees. I remember a number of times it's come up at Creeks. The word advisory is what it is. It's advisory. And the full decision gets to be made first at this level, but mostly at the full council when we accept the allocations that the committee has. That's the finality of it. So we need to all remember that that is the finality. However, we don't want to mess in the details because we know you all do a great job. But we have to get this process straight, because there are a lot of folks out there who now, I'm sure, are a wee bit confused about, well, what's for the grant and what's for the line item. And, there are a number of other organizations that get line items as well. So we need to get this straight. And according to Phyllis, she wants to agendize this particular issue, and I'm sure she's talked to you by now, Jenny, onto the agenda for a full discussion at your committee level to get this really clear and really straight about who can apply and why. And so everybody's working from the same page and set of criteria, as one woman said. So I look forward to your suggestion, you coming back before the end of the year with some clarity on some of this, having spoken to whoever in the administration you need to make sure that the pots of money are clearly defined for various different purposes. And I look forward to it. I will be supporting the recommendation to move it forward. I was hoping that there would be a compromise, but the full committee rejected that compromise and decided to stick to its original. I will respect that. I recognize that there are some serious issues we need to get very, very clear going forward. But with that, thank you all again for all of your work. It's deeply, deeply appreciated, and I know it's not easy at all. CDBG is another group that parses out money to worthy organizations, and believe me, they have too many applicants as well, and it's incredibly difficult. So thank you all very much, and I'll wait for a motion.
Ms. Snyder.
Thank you. I also want to thank, I think practically the whole committee, a lot of members are here, and staff for meeting multiple times during the month of August when normally you don't meet at all, and put in some extra time and hours into this. So I do appreciate that very much. I'm gonna agree with the recommendation from the Arts Advisory Committee and have a couple of other thoughts. One is at the Arts Advisory Committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, which I was there as the liaison. I figured that would be very important to be there at this particular meeting. I heard a lot of comments from the committee members about how can we look at this process so that it is crystal clear as opposed to up for interpretation on some levels. And I think not only for the committee members but for everyone involved who are applying for grants, that's fair. And if there are issues and concerns or multiple interpretations of how something's written up or what the process is, that needs to be cleared up. And the Arts Advisory Committee process, this process is not unique in that sense. We do that all the time with who knows how many different policies we have in view. Looking at the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance, that took 3.5 years or something. I'm not suggesting that for this committee. I think we can do it in a lot less time than that, because it's just really some really simple things I think that needs to be clarified. So that I look forward to that continued conversation. I'd also like to suggest to the committee, that the Finance Committee, that after we have that conversation, that part of the discussion should be whether or not we should consider Summer Solstice's line item to be equal with the Film Festival and Fiesta, which currently both get $60,000 a year, and the Solstice gets a little over $45,000 a year. Depending on the process that the Arts Advisory Committee comes up with, I think as we moved into the financial budget process for the next 2-year financial plan, it seems to make sense, and I know that was resonated a lot amongst most, if not all, of the Arts Advisory Committee members, was that why is it that this particular organization gets a different amount than the other two major festivals throughout in Santa Barbara, being the Film Festival and Fiesta. And I think that's a valid point in conversation that we should probably have next year during the budget process. If it's been, as has been argued, that for over a decade, if not more, Solstice has received, in essence, $15,000 more or less from this competitive grant process, then in essence the budget for the Arts Advisory Committee has been for many years your amount minus $15,000, because that was what was expected and given. So it makes perfect sense to me at this point to shift that over and forego having Solstice forego the competitive art process to begin with, if that's something that's become an expectation, become something that we value, which we do in the city of Santa Barbara. So we can't do that today. I'm not suggesting we do that today, but as we move into the next financial plan, I think we should do that. That's what we did with the Film Festival a couple of years ago, and so there's precedent for that. So again, I want to thank everyone involved in this. I know it was a bit trying, and we'll make sure there's a Solstice Parade next year. It's going to happen. It always does. And you're going to have a full council support to make that happen, I'm sure. So with that, I'm going to move the recommendation as presented by the full Arts Advisory Committee.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
My discussion would be that it was the use of the word integrity was the word was used fairly frequently in this discussion. And I'm not exactly clear what that means in this discussion. We we basically know what we receive, and when there is a level of procedural issues such as we had here, it seems as if something isn't quite right in the process. And the committee is indeed advisory, as Ms. Falcone said. So for us to clarify the fact that the process, there wasn't any issues in the process that we should have been aware of, seems to me like a legitimate thing to do, and I believe that's why we're here in the first place. So I just want to clarify my views on that use of the word. And having said that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
If I could just mention something, because I just wanted to clarify for the record that it wasn't just that the grant was incomplete. It had to do with the issue that it was poorly written, and I just want that to be included, that when the clarification of support for the community arts workshop space, I think if the grant had been articulated the way it was in the letter of clarification, I think we would not have been, I think the committee would have looked at it differently.
Okay, thank you. Any further topics today, Mr. Pearson?
No, sir. We've covered
All right, then
all
we'll
four.
adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.